Margaret sat on the cold concrete steps outside the community hall, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The autumn wind cut through her thin cardigan, but she barely felt it. With inside the building, the sounds of laughter and celebration drifted through the closed doors, a stark contrast to the emptiness she felt in her chest. She had come here tonight for the town's annual Harvest Festival, hoping to find some distraction from the pain that had consumed her life for the past 3 months. The divorce papers had been finalized that morning. 22 years of marriage reduced to legal documents and signatures. David had moved out months ago, taking with him not just his belongings but Margaret's sense of purpose and identity. At 51, she felt like a stranger in her own life. The house that had once been filled with family dinners and holiday celebrations now echoed with loneliness. Margaret pulled her phone from her purse and stared at the screen. No messages. Her 2 adult children, Sarah and Michael, had their own lives in distant cities. They called occasionally, brief conversations filled with updates about work and weather, but neither seemed to understand the depth of her struggle. They had both taken their father's side during the divorce proceedings, believing his version of events that painted Margaret as the one who had become distant and difficult. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The festival had seemed like a good idea when her neighbor Ruth had suggested it. "You need to get out of that house," Ruth had insisted. "Meet some people, have some fun." But standing in the crowded hall surrounded by couples and families, Margaret had felt more alone than ever. The music inside grew louder, and Margaret could hear the caller announcing the next square dance. She remembered dancing with David at this same festival years ago, when they were young and in love, when their biggest worry was whether they could afford a new car or a vacation. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. "Maybe you could use a hug," whispered a young girl who had appeared beside her on the steps. Margaret looked up, surprised. The child couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with curly brown hair escaping from 2 ponytails and bright green eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. She wore a simple purple dress with a white cardigan that looked handmade, and her face held an expression of genuine concern. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Margaret said, quickly wiping her eyes again. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. Are your parents inside?" The girl nodded and sat down beside Margaret without invitation. "They're dancing. I saw you crying from the window and thought you might need a friend." Margaret felt her throat tighten. When was the last time someone had offered her such simple, uncomplicated kindness? "What's your name, honey?" "Emma," the girl replied. "Emma Peterson. My mom says sometimes grown-ups forget that hugs can make almost anything feel a little better." Despite her pain, Margaret found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. "Your mom sounds very wise. I'm Margaret." "Nice to meet you, Margaret. Do you want to tell me what's making you sad?" "Sometimes talking helps too." Margaret studied the child's earnest face. There was something remarkable about Emma's presence, a calming energy that seemed to emanate from her small frame. "It's complicated, Emma. Adult problems usually are. My grandpa says that most problems aren't as complicated as we make them. He says people just forget how to be happy sometimes." The simple wisdom of the statement caught Margaret off guard. She had indeed forgotten how to be happy. Somewhere in the midst of marriage counseling sessions, legal meetings, and the daily grind of pretending everything was fine, she had lost track of what brought her joy. "You know what, Emma? I think I would like that hug." Emma immediately scooted closer and wrapped her small arms around Margaret's waist. The embrace was warm and genuine, and Margaret felt something inside her chest begin to loosen. She couldn't remember the last time David had hugged her with such pure intention. "Better?" Emma asked, pulling back to look at Margaret's face. "Much better. Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching other festival goers come and go. Margaret noticed that Emma didn't seem restless or bored, unusual for a child her age. Instead, she appeared perfectly content to simply be present. Do you live here in Millbrook? Margaret asked. We just moved here last month. Daddy got a new job at the hospital. He's a doctor who helps sick kids feel better. That must be nice having a dad who helps people. He says everyone needs help sometimes, even grown-ups. Maybe especially grown-ups because they think they have to be strong all the time. Margaret wondered about this child's family. Emma spoke with unusual maturity and compassion, suggesting she had been raised in a household where emotional intelligence was valued and nurtured. The door to the hall opened and a woman emerged, scanning the area. She was tall and elegant, with the same curly brown hair as Emma, though hers was neatly pulled back in a sophisticated bun. When she spotted Emma, relief flooded her features. There you are, sweetheart. I was wondering where you'd gone. Mama, this is my new friend Margaret. She was sad, so I gave her a hug. The woman's expression softened as she took in Margaret's tear-stained face and Emma's protective proximity to this stranger. Teddy. Hello, Margaret. I'm Claire Peterson, Emma's mother. I hope she hasn't been bothering you. Not at all, Margaret replied, standing. She's been wonderful company. You've raised a very special little girl. Claire smiled warmly. She has a gift for finding people who need her particular brand of comfort. Sometimes I think she's wiser than all the adults in her life combined. Mama, can Margaret come inside with us? She shouldn't be out here alone. Claire looked at Margaret with kind eyes. Emma's right. You're welcome to join us if you'd like. The festival is actually quite lovely once you get past the initial crowd. Margaret hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to impose on this family, but the prospect of returning to her empty house held even less appeal. I wouldn't want to intrude. You wouldn't be, Claire assured her. Emma rarely takes to strangers so quickly. She must see something special in you. Emma grabbed Margaret's hand with the confidence of a child who had never been taught to fear the world. Come on, Margaret. They're about to start the pie contest, and Mrs. Henderson makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. Margaret found herself being gently pulled toward the hall entrance. As they approached the doors, she could hear the lively music and cheerful conversation from inside. For the first time in months, the sounds didn't seem overwhelming or exclusionary. Instead, they felt welcoming. Are you sure about this? She asked Claire. Positive. Besides, Emma won't let us leave without you now. She's quite determined when she sets her mind on something. They entered the warm, brightly lit hall together. Margaret was immediately struck by the transformation in her perspective. The same crowd that had felt suffocating earlier now seemed friendly and inviting. Children ran between the tables while parents chatted and laughed. Elderly couples sat holding hands, and teenagers clustered near the refreshment table. Emma led them to a table where a tall, handsome man with kind eyes was saving seats. He stood as they approached, and Margaret could see immediately where Emma had inherited her warm nature. "Honey, this is Margaret," Claire said to her husband. Emma made a new friend. The man extended his hand with a genuine smile. David Peterson. Pleased to meet you, Margaret. Margaret shook his hand, struck by the irony that this stranger shared her ex-husband's name but seemed to possess none of his recent coldness. Margaret Walsh. Thank you for letting me join you. Any friend of Emma's is welcome at our table, David said, pulling out a chair for her. Emma has excellent judgment when it comes to people. As they settled in to watch the pie contest, Margaret felt something she had almost forgotten existed, the simple pleasure of human connection. Emma stayed close to her throughout the evening, occasionally taking her hand or offering commentary on the various festival activities. The Peterson family included her in their conversations naturally, never making her feel like an outsider or charity case. When the evening finally wound down, Margaret realized she had laughed more in the past 3 hours than she had in the previous 3 months. As families began gathering their belongings and saying their goodbyes, Emma approached her with a serious expression. Margaret, will you come to church with us tomorrow? Pastor Williams tells really good stories, and afterward we always go to Johnson's Diner for pancakes. Margaret looked at Claire and David, who nodded encouragingly. She hadn't been to church since the divorce proceedings began, feeling too raw and angry to sit through sermons about love and forgiveness. But Emma's invitation felt different, less about religious obligation and more about continued friendship. "I'd like that very much," Margaret heard herself saying. Emma beamed and threw her arms around Margaret's waist again. "I'm so glad I found you tonight." As Margaret drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, she reflected on the unexpected turn her evening had taken. She had left her house earlier feeling like her life was over, that she had nothing left to offer the world. But a small girl with an enormous heart had shown her otherwise. For the first time since David had packed his belongings and walked out their front door, Margaret felt a tiny spark of hope flickering in her chest. The house still felt empty when she unlocked the front door, but somehow the silence didn't seem as oppressive. She moved through her evening routine with slightly more energy than usual, and when she finally climbed into bed, she found herself looking forward to the morning instead of dreading it. Tomorrow she would go to church with the Petersons. She would eat pancakes and listen to Emma's chatter about whatever had captured her attention. She would take the first small step toward rebuilding a life that felt worth living. And it had all started with a simple offer from a child who believed in the healing power of human connection. Margaret pulled the covers up to her chin and smiled in the darkness. Sometimes salvation came in the most unexpected packages. Sunday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and golden sunlight streaming through Margaret's bedroom windows. For the first time in months, she woke without the crushing weight of dread settling on her chest. Instead, she felt something she barely recognized: anticipation. Emma and her family were expecting her at church, and the simple act of being wanted somewhere made all the difference. Margaret stood before her closet, realizing she hadn't dressed for anything social in weeks. Most of her recent wardrobe choices had been dictated by court appearances and attorney meetings. Today felt different. She selected a navy blue dress that David had always complimented, then paused. Why was she thinking about what David would have liked? She shook her head and chose instead a burgundy sweater and gray slacks that made her feel comfortable and confident. The drive to First Methodist Church took her through the heart of Millbrook, past the bakery where she and David used to buy Sunday morning croissants, past the park where they had taken their children when they were small. But instead of the usual stab of pain these familiar places brought, Margaret found herself observing them with new eyes. The bakery's window display looked inviting. The park's playground was filled with laughing children and their parents. Life was continuing, evolving, moving forward. She spotted the Peterson family on the church steps immediately. Emma was practically bouncing with excitement, her curly hair catching the morning light. When she saw Margaret's car pull into the parking lot, she broke away from her parents and ran to greet her. "Margaret, you came! I was afraid you might change your mind." "I promised I would be here," Margaret said, accepting another of Emma's enthusiastic hugs. "I don't break promises to friends." Claire approached with a warm smile. "Good morning, Margaret." "You look lovely today. Thank you." "I feel better than I have in a long time." David Peterson joined them, carrying a worn leather Bible. "Ready for Pastor William's famous storytelling? He has a gift for making even the most familiar tales feel fresh and relevant." As they entered the church together, Margaret was struck by the sense of community that permeated the space. People genuinely seemed happy to see one another, and several congregation members approached to welcome her warmly. Claire introduced her simply as "our friend Margaret," and no one pressed for details about her background or circumstances. Emma insisted that Margaret sit between her and Claire during the service. Throughout the opening hymns and prayers, Emma would occasionally reach over to squeeze Margaret's hand or whisper observations about the stained glass windows or the choir's performance. Her innocent commentary provided a delightful distraction from Margaret's own swirling thoughts about faith, forgiveness, and fresh starts. Pastor Williams, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner, began his sermon with a story about a traveler who had lost her way in a storm. Margaret found herself drawn into the narrative despite her recent skepticism about organized religion. The pastor spoke about unexpected guides who appear when we need them most, about the courage required to accept help from strangers, and about the healing power of community. Sometimes, Pastor Williams said, his voice carrying easily through the sanctuary, God sends us angels in the most ordinary disguises. A child's smile, a neighbor's casserole, a stranger's kindness. Our job is not to question why we deserve such grace, but simply to receive it with gratitude and pass it forward when the opportunity arises. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the bitter tears she had shed the night before. These felt cleansing, hopeful. She glanced at Emma, who was listening with rapt attention despite her young age, and wondered if this remarkable child understood how profoundly she had impacted a stranger's life. After the service, the Peterson family kept their promise about pancakes at Johnson's Diner. The restaurant was bustling with the post-church crowd, filled with the comfortable chatter of families and friends sharing Sunday breakfast. Emma insisted that Margaret sit beside her in the booth, and proceeded to provide detailed commentary on the menu's various options. The blueberry pancakes are really good, but the chocolate chip ones are my favorite, Emma explained seriously. Daddy always gets the plain ones because he says they're classic, but I think classic can be boring sometimes. David laughed. I'm sitting right here, sweetheart. I can hear your criticism of my breakfast choices. It's not criticism, Daddy. It's helpful suggestions for improvement. Claire shook her head with amusement. Emma's going to be a diplomat someday. She has a gift for speaking her mind while somehow making it sound like a compliment. As they waited for their food, Claire turned to Margaret with genuine interest. Emma mentioned you live here in Millbrook. Have you been in town long? Margaret stirred cream into her coffee, considering how much to share. The Petersons had been nothing but kind to her, but she wasn't sure she was ready to discuss the painful details of her recent life changes. Most of my adult life, actually. My husband and I moved here when our children were small. It's a good place to raise a family. She noticed Claire's subtle glance at her left hand, where Margaret still wore her wedding ring out of habit more than sentiment. Do your children still live in the area? No, they're both adults now. Sarah lives in Portland, and Michael is in Denver. They're both busy with their own lives and careers. Emma looked up from the elaborate tower she was constructing with sugar packets. Do you miss them? The simple, direct question caught Margaret off guard. Yes, sweetheart, I miss them very much. Maybe you could visit them, or they could visit you. My grandma lives far away, but we talk on the computer every week, and she comes to stay with us for holidays. Margaret felt her throat tighten. Her relationship with Sarah and Michael had become strained during the divorce proceedings. They maintained polite contact, but the warm, easy closeness they had once shared seemed to be another casualty of her failed marriage. That's a wonderful way to stay close to family, she managed. David seemed to sense the shift in Margaret's mood. Emma, why don't you tell Margaret about your new school? She's been quite excited about making friends here. Emma launched into an animated description of her third-grade classroom, her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, and the elaborate playground equipment that apparently included the best swings in the whole world. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Margaret found herself relaxing again, drawn into the child's uncomplicated joy about simple pleasures. When their breakfast arrived, Emma insisted that everyone try a bite of her chocolate chip pancakes to properly appreciate their superiority. Margaret had barely eaten anything substantial in weeks, but found herself genuinely enjoying the food and conversation. For the first time since David had asked for a divorce, she felt hungry for something other than the numbness that had sustained her through the worst of her grief. As they finished their meal, Claire mentioned that they were planning to visit the farmer's market after breakfast. Would you like to join us? It's a lovely way to spend a Sunday afternoon, and Emma loves to sample all the free cheese and apple slices the vendors offer. Margaret hesitated. She had already imposed on their family time more than she felt comfortable with. But Emma's hopeful expression made it difficult to refuse. Are you sure I wouldn't be in the way? Absolutely not, David said firmly. We're new in town too, and it's nice to explore with someone who knows the area. The farmer's market was set up in the town square, with dozens of vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. Emma appointed herself as Margaret's tour guide, pulling her from stall to stall and providing enthusiastic commentary on everything they encountered. At the honey vendor's booth, she convinced Margaret to try 3 different varieties. At the pottery stand, she declared that Margaret needed a new coffee mug to make mornings happier. Margaret found herself buying the mug, a beautiful piece with a deep blue glaze that felt substantial and comforting in her hands. It was the first thing she had purchased for herself, rather than out of necessity since the divorce proceedings began. As they wandered through the market, Claire fell into step beside Margaret. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem like someone who's been through a difficult time recently." Margaret glanced at her, surprised by the gentle directness of the observation. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there herself. I went through my own dark period a few years ago. Not a divorce, but a different kind of loss that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my life." "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Claire was quiet for a moment, watching Emma and David examine a display of pumpkins. "I had a miscarriage at 6 months. We had already painted the nursery, chosen names, built our lives around the idea of this baby. When we lost him, I felt like I had lost myself too." Margaret stopped walking. "I'm so sorry. Thank you. It took a long time to find my way back to feeling like a whole person again. But what I learned is that healing doesn't happen in isolation. It requires connection, community, people who are willing to sit with you in your sadness without trying to fix it or rush you through it." They resumed walking, Emma's laughter drifting back to them, as David pretended to be scared by a particularly large pumpkin. "Emma was already born when this happened?" Margaret asked. "Yes, she was about 5. In many ways, she helped save me. Children have this amazing ability to live completely in the present moment. Emma would wake up each morning excited about the day ahead, regardless of how much I had cried the night before. She reminded me that life continues, that there's still beauty and joy to be found even in the midst of grief." Margaret felt tears threatening again. "She has an extraordinary gift for that. Last night was the first time I felt even remotely like myself in months." "What's been so difficult, if you're comfortable sharing?" Margaret took a deep breath. "My husband asked for a divorce earlier this year, 20 years of marriage, and he decided he wanted something different. Someone different. The worst part is that my children seem to think it's somehow my fault. They've been distant and cold, and I feel like I've lost not just my husband, but my entire family." Claire stopped and turned to face her. "Oh, Margaret. That's devastating. No wonder you looked so lost last night. I've been trying to figure out who I am now, what my purpose is supposed to be. For so long, my identity was wrapped up in being David's wife and Sarah and Michael's mother. Without those roles, I feel invisible. You're not invisible to Emma, or to us. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves to find ourselves, if that makes sense. The person you were before you became a wife and mother is still there, waiting to be rediscovered." Emma came running back to them, breathless with excitement. "Margaret, there's a lady selling puppies, real live puppies, with Trust Teddy. Can we go look at them, please?" David appeared behind his daughter, slightly out of breath from chasing her through the crowd. "Emma, slow down. And remember, we can look, but we're not getting a puppy today." "I know, Daddy." "I just want Margaret to see them because puppies make everyone happy." As they approached the puppy pen, Margaret watched Emma's face light up with pure delight. She knelt beside the enclosure and let the small golden retriever puppies lick her fingers through the wire mesh. "Look how soft they are. And they're so wiggly." Margaret found herself kneeling beside Emma, charmed despite herself by the puppy's playful antics. One particularly bold puppy kept trying to climb over his litter mates to get closer to the humans on the other side of the pen. "That one likes you," Emma observed. "He keeps looking right at you." The puppy seller, an elderly woman with weathered hands and kind eyes, approached them. "He's been doing that all morning, picking out people in the crowd and trying to get their attention, almost like he's interviewing potential families." "How old are they?" Margaret asked, surprised by her own interest. 8 weeks old, just ready for their forever homes. That little fellow there is the last of his litter. His brothers and sisters were all claimed yesterday, but he's been waiting for just the right person. Emma looked up at Margaret with hope shining in her eyes. Maybe he's been waiting for you. Margaret laughed but felt an unexpected tug in her chest. Oh, sweetheart, I couldn't possibly get a puppy right now. I don't know anything about taking care of dogs. I could teach you, Emma offered seriously. And Mama has lots of books about pets. Dogs are excellent companions for people who need cheering up. Claire and David exchanged amused glances over their daughter's head. Emma, Claire said gently, that's a big decision for Margaret to make. She needs to think about it carefully. But Margaret found herself staring into the puppy's bright brown eyes, feeling something stir inside her that she hadn't experienced in months. The little dog seemed to be studying her with unusual intelligence, as if he could see past her sadness to something worth waiting for. What would I even name him? She murmured almost to herself. Hope, Emma said immediately, because he gives you hope. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Margaret felt tears starting again, but these were different from any she had cried in recent memory. These felt like the first drops of rain after a long drought, promising growth and renewal. She looked at the puppy seller. Could I hold him for a minute? As the elderly woman placed the warm, wiggling bundle of fur in Margaret's arms, she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. The puppy immediately settled against her, as if he had been waiting his entire short life for this exact moment. Emma clapped her hands together with delight, and even David and Claire seemed moved by the instant connection between woman and dog. I think, Margaret said softly, that Emma might be right about this one. As they walked back to their cars later that afternoon, Margaret carried a bag of puppy supplies and a small dog crate. Hope rode in Emma's arms, having apparently decided that his new family included all 4 of these humans who had rescued him from his lonely wait at the market. Margaret felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated by what she had done. For the first time in months, she had acted on impulse rather than fear, chosen possibility over safety. Emma insisted on helping Margaret set up Hope's new home, and the Peterson family spent the rest of the afternoon at Margaret's house, puppy-proofing rooms and dispensing advice about feeding schedules and training techniques. As evening approached and it came time for them to leave, Emma gave both Margaret and Hope careful hugs. Will you bring Hope to the park tomorrow after school? Emma asked. I want to introduce him to all the kids in the neighborhood. I think Hope would like that very much, Margaret replied, realizing she was already looking forward to tomorrow for the second day in a row. As she watched the Peterson family drive away, Margaret sat on her front porch with Hope curled in her lap. The house behind her no longer felt like a hollow shell of broken dreams. Instead, it felt like a home where new chapters could be written, where a woman and her dog could figure out what came next together. She scratched behind Hope's ears and smiled as he sighed contentedly in his sleep. Emma had been right. Sometimes all it took was one small act of faith to change everything. 3 weeks later, Margaret's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Hope had indeed brought hope, just as Emma had predicted. The golden retriever puppy had filled her house with energy, purpose, and unconditional love. More importantly, he had given her a reason to establish routines, to venture outside daily, and to connect with her community in entirely new ways. Every morning, Margaret woke to Hope's gentle nudging and excited tail wagging. Their daily walks through Millbrook's tree-lined neighborhoods had become opportunities for unexpected conversations with other dog owners, shopkeepers, and neighbors she had never previously noticed. Hope was an excellent conversation starter, and Margaret found herself gradually rebuilding the social connections that had withered during her marriage's final difficult years. Emma had kept her promise about introducing Hope to the neighborhood children. The park had become their regular afternoon destination, where Emma would arrive after school with various friends in tow, all eager to play with the increasingly popular puppy. Margaret discovered that watching children interact with Hope brought her a particular kind of joy she hadn't experienced since her own children were small. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Margaret sat on her usual park bench while Hope wrestled with a tennis ball that Emma's friend Tyler had brought. The autumn air was crisp but pleasant, and the playground was filled with the sounds of children's laughter and parents chatting among themselves. Margaret had begun to recognize the regular families, and several had started including her in their casual conversations about school events, local news, and the daily challenges of raising children. "Margaret!" Emma's voice called out across the playground. She was running toward the bench with her characteristic enthusiasm, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Behind her, Claire followed at a more sedate pace, carrying what appeared to be a manila folder. "Hello, sweetheart," Margaret said, accepting Emma's exuberant hug. "How was school today?" "It was good, but I have something really important to tell you. Mama has news too, but she made me promise to let her tell you herself." Claire approached with a smile that seemed to contain excitement barely held in check. "Hello, Margaret. I hope you don't mind us tracking you down here, but Emma insisted we couldn't wait until Sunday to share our news."
"Of course not."
"You both always brighten my day. What's this important information that couldn't wait?" Emma practically vibrated with excitement. "Tell her, Mama. Tell her about the job." Claire sat down beside Margaret on the bench, the folder balanced on her knees. "Well, you know that David works at the hospital, and you mentioned a few weeks ago that you used to work in medical administration before the children were born." Margaret nodded, curious about where this conversation was heading. During one of their Sunday diner conversations, she had mentioned her previous career managing patient records and insurance processing at a large clinic in the next town over. It felt like a lifetime ago, but she had genuinely enjoyed the work and been good at it. The hospital is expanding their patient services department, and they're looking for someone with experience to help coordinate the new programs. David mentioned your background to his supervisor, and she asked if you might be interested in interviewing for the position. Margaret felt her heart skip a beat. "Are you serious?" Emma bounced on her toes. "It would be perfect. You could work with Daddy, and you'd be helping sick kids feel better, just like he does." Claire opened the folder and handed Margaret a job description. "It's not working directly with patients, but it would involve coordinating care programs, managing communications between departments, and helping families navigate the system." The supervisor, Linda Martinez, said they specifically need someone with both technical skills and the kind of empathy that makes families feel supported during difficult times. Margaret scanned the document, her excitement building with each line. The position seemed tailor-made for her background and interests. More than that, it represented the possibility of rebuilding her professional identity alongside her personal one. "This sounds wonderful, but are you sure David's supervisor would be comfortable hiring someone just on his recommendation? She doesn't even know me." "Actually, she does know about you, in a way," Claire said with a smile. "Linda lives in your neighborhood, and she's one of the dog walkers you've been chatting with at the park. She mentioned to David that she's been impressed by how naturally you interact with the children here and how patient and kind you are with Hope. She said those qualities are exactly what they need in someone who'll be working with worried families." Margaret thought back through her recent park encounters, trying to place Linda Martinez. Then she remembered. The tall woman with the friendly border collie who had complimented Hope's training progress and asked thoughtful questions about Margaret's background. They had chatted several times about pets, children, and community events, conversations that had felt natural and comfortable. "She was interviewing me without me knowing it," Margaret realized with amazement. "Not interviewing exactly," Claire clarified. "Just getting to know you as a person." Linda believes that technical skills can be taught, but character and compassion are either there or they're not. She said she could tell from your interactions with the children and other dog owners that you have both qualities in abundance. Emma couldn't contain her excitement any longer. "And the best part is that if you take the job, we can eat lunch together sometimes. The hospital cafeteria has really good chocolate cake." Margaret felt tears pricking her eyes again, but these had become tears of gratitude rather than grief. "When would the interview be?" "Linda said she could meet with you whenever you're ready. The position starts the 1st of December, which would give you time to complete their orientation program and settle into the role before the busy holiday season. Margaret looked down at Hope, who had abandoned his tennis ball and was now sprawled in a patch of sunlight, his pink tongue lolling out in contentment. Everything about her new life felt interconnected in the most remarkable way. Emma's simple act of kindness had led to friendship with the Petersons, which had led to hope, which had led to daily walks and community connections, which had somehow led to this unexpected opportunity to rebuild her career. "I'd like to schedule the interview," Margaret said, her voice steady with newfound confidence. "I think I'm ready to take the next step." Emma clapped her hands together. "I knew you would say yes. Mama, can we celebrate with ice cream?" Claire laughed. "I think that's an excellent idea. Margaret, would you and Hope like to join us for a celebration cone at Morrison's ice cream parlor?" As they walked the few blocks to the ice cream shop, Hope trotting happily on his leash between Margaret and Emma, Margaret reflected on how profoundly her life had changed. 6 weeks ago, she had been sitting on those community hall steps believing she had nothing left to offer the world. Now she was surrounded by friends, caring for a loving pet, and preparing to interview for a job that could give her life new meaning and purpose. At Morrison's, they found a table on the outdoor patio where Hope could lie in the shade while they enjoyed their ice cream. Emma insisted that Margaret try the maple walnut flavor, declaring it perfect for fall and new beginnings. As they sat in the golden afternoon sunlight, Emma regaled them with stories about her classmates and upcoming school projects, while Claire and David discussed the details of Margaret's potential new position. "You know," David said thoughtfully, "Linda mentioned that one of the things they've been struggling with is helping families who are dealing with major life changes while their children are receiving treatment, parents going through divorces, job losses, relocations. They need someone who understands that medical care happens within the context of people's whole lives, not just their physical symptoms." Margaret nodded, understanding immediately. "During my first marriage crisis, I felt like all the medical professionals we encountered only saw the immediate problem, never the bigger picture of how scared and overwhelmed we were as a family." "Exactly. You'd be in a position to help other families feel less alone during some of their most difficult moments." Emma, who had been listening while methodically working her way through a strawberry cone, suddenly looked up with bright eyes. "Margaret, you'll be like me." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "You'll be helping sad people feel better, just like I helped you feel better that night at the festival. But you'll get to help lots and lots of people instead of just one at a time." The simple profundity of Emma's observation struck Margaret with unexpected force. She had spent weeks thinking about how the child had saved her, but she hadn't considered that perhaps her own painful experiences could be transformed into a source of comfort and strength for others. 2 days later, Margaret sat across from Linda Martinez in a bright conference room at Millbrook General Hospital. Linda was exactly as she remembered from the park, warm, intelligent, and genuinely interested in understanding who Margaret was as a person, rather than just reviewing her qualifications on paper. "I have to admit," Linda said after they had discussed Margaret's previous work experience and technical skills, "that David's recommendation carried a lot of weight, but it was my own observations of you at the park that really convinced me you might be right for this position." "I'm grateful for the opportunity," Margaret replied. "I've been going through a difficult personal transition this year, and I want to make sure you're comfortable hiring someone who's still finding her footing in some areas of her life." Linda smiled. "Margaret, some of our best employees are people who have faced their own challenges. There's something about going through difficult times that either breaks people or makes them more empathetic and resilient. From what I've observed, you're definitely in the latter category." The interview continued for another hour, covering everything from technical systems to patient privacy protocols to conflict resolution strategies. Margaret found herself energized by the conversation, her mind already racing with ideas about how she could contribute to the hospital's mission. When Linda offered her the position at the end of the interview, Margaret felt a surge of emotion that had become familiar over the past few weeks. The mixture of gratitude, excitement, and disbelief that her life had taken such a positive turn. That evening, Margaret called Sarah and Michael to share her good news. The conversations were tentative at first, both of her children seeming surprised by the enthusiasm and confidence in their mother's voice. Margaret had spent months protecting them from her pain, pretending to be fine when she clearly wasn't. Hearing her genuine excitement about something new seemed to remind them of the mother they had known before the divorce proceedings began. "Mom, you sound different," Sarah observed from her apartment in Portland. "Happier. Stronger. I feel different," Margaret admitted. "I think I'm finally starting to figure out who I am when I'm not defined entirely by my relationships to other people." "I'm proud of you for getting back out there," Michael added from Denver. "Dad mentioned that you seemed to be doing better when he saw you at the grocery store last week." Margaret was surprised by this information. She had seen David briefly in the produce section but hadn't thought he'd paid much attention to her demeanor. They had exchanged polite greetings and went their separate ways, but apparently he had noticed something different about her presence. "I've made some wonderful new friends," Margaret told her children. "There's a family with a remarkable little girl who basically saved my life without even realizing it. They've helped me remember that there's still goodness and possibility in the world, even when everything feels dark." By the time Margaret hung up from both calls, she realized that her relationship with her children was beginning to heal as well. They seemed relieved to hear their mother sounding like herself again, and for the first time in months they made concrete plans to visit during the upcoming holidays. On her first day of work, 2 weeks later, Margaret woke before her alarm, energized and nervous in equal measure. Hope seemed to sense the significance of the morning, staying unusually close to her as she prepared for the day. As she left the house in her professional clothes for the first time in over a year, Margaret paused on her front porch to look back at the home that had once felt like a prison of broken dreams. Now it looked like exactly what it was, a house where a woman and her dog were building a new life together, one day at a time. At the hospital, Linda Martinez introduced Margaret to her colleagues and began the orientation process that would prepare her for her new role. Throughout the morning, Margaret felt a growing sense of rightness about this next chapter. As she learned about the various programs she would be coordinating, she could already envision ways to help families navigate difficult times with greater support and understanding. During her lunch break, she texted Emma, "First day going great. Can't wait to tell you all about it at the park tomorrow." Emma's response came back immediately. "I knew you would be wonderful. Hope says congratulations too." Margaret smiled as she put her phone away. In just a few months, a chance encounter with a compassionate child had led to friendship, community, purpose, and the rediscovery of her own resilience. She had learned that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest gestures: a hug offered to a stranger, a hand extended in friendship, the courage to accept help when it's offered. As she returned to her orientation activities, Margaret felt grateful beyond measure for the night Emma had whispered those fateful words, "Maybe you could use a hug." That single moment of human connection had set in motion a chain of events that had restored her faith in herself and her future. She thought about all the families she would soon be helping. People who were probably sitting in waiting rooms and consultation offices feeling as lost and hopeless as she had felt that night outside the community hall. Now, she would have the opportunity to offer them the same kind of unexpected grace that Emma had shown her, the reminder that they were not alone, that healing was possible, and that sometimes salvation came in the most ordinary disguises. Margaret smiled as she opened her training manual and began to read about patient advocacy protocols. She had work to do, and for the first time in a very long time, she couldn't wait to get started.